Under no circumstances are you allowed to look at or comment on my hair.
I'm not rereading Tower of Dawn because it's bad.
Once upon a time, when I was still possessed of my wide-eyed innocence about how long this project was going to take, I thought I could forego rereading Tower of Dawn completely. It's my least favorite book, and because it is so weirdly removed from all the other books in the series, I figured I would just look up a plot synopsis and give y'all the relevant info and we could move on with our lives. But alas, as this project has gone on longer and gotten bigger, I realized that I was probably gonna have to reread the whole thing and talk about it. So, this is Tower of Dawn. But first, a disclaimer. There are a lot of ways this video could go, because there are a lot of things you could choose to focus on about this book. My past videos have mostly been just plot synopses and some commentary sprinkled throughout, so that's what this video is going to be too. However, I want to acknowledge before we really get into it that there are conversations we could have about this book that focus solely on how Sarah J Maas, as a white woman, chooses to construct and represent race in her fantasy world. I've talked in the past about how the character Nehemia gets fridged under, at the very least, uncomfortable circumstances when you consider the racial politics at play. And in a lot of ways, it seems like Tower of Dawn is Maas's attempt to kind of rectify that, and also the overall lack of diversity in her world in general. And it does that by introducing us to a new setting that is primarily based on historical Mongolian culture. I want to say, I don't think Sarah J Maas acts with intentional malice towards her BIPOC characters. From what I know of her real life, I think that she considers herself aligned with very progressive and liberal views on this subject. She doesn't set out to write worlds full of straight cis white people, but what she does write is worlds that she can see herself in. She wants to be able to be a part of her world, and she is a cis white seemingly heterosexual woman, so there's the rub. And the thing about her efforts to diversify her world with Tower of Dawn is that more than anything, in my opinion, it comes across as shallow, which ends up undermining her whole goal. Because sometimes, even when you don't mean any harm by it, trying to fix the problematic elements of your story ends up just exacerbating those same problems, especially if your solution is to just cram new characters and new cultures in between and beside the old ones. My bigger point here is that while Tower of Dawn marks a shift in the way Sarah J Maas wants us to think about racial representation and construction in her books, and therefore we could have a full video breakdown of my thoughts and feelings and analysis of that specific paradigm shift, it's my feeling that I wouldn't be giving that conversation the care and thought it deserves if I'm sandwiching it in between me making my little jokes and jumping around my character board. So I'm not really going to dive into my thoughts and feelings on that specific issue in this video, but I do think it's a very important aspect of Maas's writing and of this book in particular to think about. And I feel a responsibility to just point that out and to explain why I'm not going to go deeper on it. It's not because the fuel for that conversation isn't there. It's just because I feel like this isn't the place to have that conversation right now. My plan right now is to do a final wrap-up video of my personal thoughts and feelings kind of at the end of all of these videos. So I think more of that conversation will end up there. For now, for this video, I'm just going to tell you what happens in Tower of Dawn. Let's get started. It's raining for real. Tower of Dawn occurs parallel to the previous novel, Empire of Storms. Remember all those dozens and dozens of characters we were dealing with last time? Ignore all of them. Look down here at this new character map I had to make because I ran out of room on the old one. This is who we're dealing with. We are treated to Chaol and Nesryn's adventures on the southern continent. What's the southern continent? I'm glad you asked. It is the continent to the south of the northern one. This continent is all one country. It's an empire that's made up of numerous cultures that have all been gathered under the banner of a Khaganate led by a Khagan. I don't know how some of these words are supposed to be pronounced. I've never heard them said out loud. Bear with me. This Khaganate has existed for thousands of years at this point, and the current Khagan is named Eurus. He has a wife who is unnamed and 6 children. In birth order, we have Argun, aka the Prince of Spies, Princess Sartok, the military commander of his father's giant eagle air force called the Rukhin. Sartok has a Ruk named Kadara, she slayed. Hussar, the fiery commander of her father's armadas. Kashin. I'm gonna pronounce his name like 8 different ways in this video, and I'm sorry for that.
And for that, I am sorry.
The also fiery, but in a different way, he's hot, commander of his father's horse lords, Duva, who was recently married to a foreign prince. He doesn't get a name. Also, she's pregnant, and Tumulun. Before we go any further, I want to warn you, this book is extremely boring, which sucks, because, like, at least when I'm annoyed by Aelin and company's bullshit, it's entertaining. This book is not entertaining. It's just tedious because the whole forward momentum of the past 5 books just grinds to a halt while Sarah spends a ton of the penultimate book in her fantasy saga just like dumping new lore on us and trying to make us believe that we should care about these new characters in this new setting. And it's not gonna matter after this book. This book is nearly 700 pages long. Technically a lot of stuff happens in it, but almost none of it will matter outside of this specific book when we come back for the finale. And most of it is just characters straight up telling us things. Just so you know. Nesryn and Chaol have arrived in the capital city of the southern continent called Antica to try and win over the Kagan to aid them in the war. Unfortunately, they embarrass themselves immediately because they've missed the news that the Kagan's youngest daughter, Princess Tumulun, has died recently. The Kagan is not in a particularly negotiating, allying himself mood. Also, Chaol doesn't even speak Hala, which is the native language on this continent. It's giving Emily in Paris. Tumulun's death appeared to be a suicide, but shortly after their arrival, Prince Cashin comes to Chaol and tells him that he thinks she was actually murdered. So now there's a little mystery on her hands. Don't worry, it won't be as exciting as you think it is. The prince suspects Erwin's forces are responsible because he thinks the Valg may have somehow already entered the palace, and he recruits Chaol to keep an eye out because Chaol is more familiar with the Valg and what Valg possession looks like. Then a servant named Kaja appears and offers to blow Chaol in the bath. Why is this a James Bond film? Chaol says, no thank you. Chaol and Nesryn actually have 2 goals here in Antica. Besides persuading the Kagan to join the war effort, Chaol is also seeking healing for his paralysis at the famous Torah Sesme, a tower school of magical healers headed by Hafiza. So because of this healing plot, we meet Irene Towers, a magical healer blessed by the goddess Silba, as are all healers, that's why they're all up here, who originally hails from Finharrow on the northern continent. She made her way to Antica to learn at the Torah after a mysterious stranger gifted her a bunch of money when Irene was still waitressing in a tavern a few years ago. Psst, this was the plot of one of the novellas, meaning that the woman that she now owes everything to is of course Aelin. Irene is planning to leave Antica and return to her homeland to join the fight against Adarlan, but Hafiza kind of wants her to stay because she thinks Irene should be her successor as leader of the Torah. Also, Irene used to be friends with Kashin and also Hussar and Hussar's partner Rinia, but that's kind of been tense recently because Irene rejected Kashin's advances. Oh, I should have done a little line. Sorry, it's so unimportant that I forgot. Oh, and okay, but it is kind of important because it brings up another element of the Southern Continent's world building. The way the Khaganate works is that the current Khagan chooses their successor from their children. It's not birth order. This breeds competition among the royal children. The Khagan siblings are sometimes allowed to survive, but usually only if they agree to be sterilized. And if they already have children, those children will probably be killed. This is wild to me because throughout this book, the Southern Continent is framed like a utopia. It's presented to us as if it's the ideal version of what a good empire would look like. Why are these books so weirdly pro-empire? Sarah really wants us to believe that the Southern Continent is this like enlightened, transcendentally progressive nation where everything great happens and nothing bad happens, but she also writes it to be founded through conquest and also these somewhat like disturbing ways of keeping power struggles to a minimum. And we know she wants us to find them disturbing because Irene states that one of her reasons for rejecting Cashin, who's this like hot young prince who should totally be a good match for her, is because she doesn't want to have to worry about herself, her children, or her husband being killed if he isn't selected as heir. The whole framing of the southern continent is just really weird and like contradictory at times. Anyway, Hafiza assigns Irene to Chaol's healing, which Irene at first doesn't want to do because her mother, Josephine, was killed by Otterlinian soldiers for being a magic healer, and she hates anyone associated with the Nameless King because of it. But eventually she relents and accepts the assignment because of her healer's oath. Great. Nesryn's dad is from the southern continent originally, so while she's here, she goes out and sees her uncle and aunt and like cousins. This is all Nesryn's family. They do all get names, but also none of them are important, so they're just up here. While she's visiting, she runs into Prince Sartok, who seems cool. Meanwhile, Chaol is dealing with Prince Argun, who seems like a dick. Nesryn and Chaol are like dating now, but they immediately start having relationship problems, and the whole thing is pretty much dead on arrival in this book. I don't know why Sarah made them love interests in the first place if we were never actually going to see them be together, but even though they are clearly going to break up, they don't officially break up. It is very important to me that you understand this. Chaol and Nesryn are shit at communicating in this book. To heal Chaol, Irene needs to understand the nature of his wound, so she does research on the Valg in the Torah library and discovers a book from Eelwai showing the 3 Valg kings and a word gate, and then she gets freaked out and thinks that something is stalking her through the library. As she leaves, she trips over another healer's body, which looks like it's been killed by the Valg. This is all very reminiscent of like the early Rifthold books. When Chaol hears about this, he feels bad that his arrival may have endangered the healers because they're all helpless women and he's a strong man. And he offers to teach them self-defense. Irene got like 1 night of self-defense instruction from Aelin in a tavern 3 years ago, and somehow this makes her qualified to now teach a weekly self-defense class to her healer friends. This is stupid, but Chaol learns how to ride a horse with braces when he goes to be a guest instructor. There are remnants of Valg energy tied to his wound, and when Irene tries to heal him, Chaol experiences blinding pain. The only way to ease his pain and heal is for Chaol to work through his feelings about the injury, since it seems like the Valg shadow is feeding off his repressed emotions. Chaol, who is not historically known for dealing with his emotions in mature and responsible ways, is not psyched about this. Irene says too bad, do it anyway. She also reminds him that he recently told her no one could loathe him more than himself. I disagree. So basically, this book is divided into 2 main plots. Chaol and Irene do healing stuff, and Nesryn and Sartok do mystery stuff. Because yes, while Chaol is getting healed every morning, Nesryn has befriended Sartok and his Ruck, Kadara, and they've bonded over their love for their mothers and also for the southern continent, and Nesryn has told him about the Valg and how they possess people in Otterlin. Sartok says he's heard similar stories from his Hearth mother when he was training with the Ruckin at their Aeries. A visit to the Aeries is in the works for the near future. Plot thread 1, the healing stuff, is literally just a way for Sarah J Maas to deep dive Chaol's psyche. I assume this is because she expects her readers to find him interesting. Unfortunately, I find him self-righteous and aggravating. That being said, because we spend so much time in Chaol's head in this book, we learn that he feels intense survivor's guilt relating to all of the deaths that have occurred around him in the series so far. This includes Nehemia, Sorsha, and also the men who were previously under his command in Otterlin, including these 2 minor characters from previous books that I didn't put on the board until this one, Ress and Brulo. They were tortured and killed by Dorian when he was under Valg possession. The survivor's guilt is also tied to his memories of leaving his abusive father's household when he was young, which is this guy who maybe has a name. He's in the second book, but I ignored it. He feels guilt for leaving his mother and his younger brother behind. I don't remember this character. Put these 2 in a club. This is a guilt that he felt replicated years later when he ran away after Sorsha's death and feels like he abandoned Dorian. Did you want to know all that about his brain? He thinks through all of this during a healing session with Irene, and in the end he has regained mobility in his toes. Yay, a breakthrough. So that's how this part of the book progresses. Chaol shares some of his repressed emotions, and he's rewarded by Sarah J Maas's magic system with improvement to his spinal injury. What I'm saying is, this book sets up a murder mystery in the first 3 chapters, and then for a long time afterwards, the forward motion is fueled entirely by Chaol's internal journey. Gag. So in my opinion, the whole healing plotline has like 3 interesting scenes, but for the most part, it's just Chaol and Irene growing closer while she takes him on dates around the city and he slowly heals. Yes, I said dates. Every once in a while, this book remembers that it's trying to be like a high-stakes courtly political intrigue drama, like when Hussar tells Irene that she wants her to spy on Chaol for her and get info about Aelin. The princess is afraid that Aelin will set her sights on the southern continent next because Aelin is fucking terrifying. This leads to a scene at a feast where a bunch of opiates are passed around / being inhaled secondhand, and also everyone starts making out until it seems like we're building towards a full-on public orgy, which A, it is noted that Chaol is not into, and B, Chaol has explained his rejection of Kaja by saying he's not inclined to stray, but then 0.5 minutes later, he is feeling up Irene on a couch in this dinner party. And he and Nesryn still haven't officially broken up. But it's okay, because the drugs made them do it, and also Chaol feels bad about getting a boner later. I hate him. Irene tells Chaol about Hussar's plan to spy on him, and he tells her to say that Aelin's going to Skull's Bay, because he knows that's the last place Aelin would actually go.
You're an idiot!
And then that night, Chaol and Nesryn talk about their relationship. No. She tells him Sartok's invited her to go with him to the Ruck Ares, and when she leaves Chaol a note that basically says, we're done, have fun, I'll be back in 3 weeks. That's how they break up. Chaol and Irene hide the books that Irene found in the Torah library on the Valg, and Irene asks what happened to the other 2 Valg kings. People always say that they were either killed or returned to their homeworld, but if they were just sent back to their homeworld, they could be waiting to return to this one on the other side of the Word Gate. Word Gates? Plural? I don't know what they are still. Anyway, this is a good point, and Chaol freaks out because apparently none of the good guys have ever thought of it before, and they all were just like, out of sight, out of mind. They also talk about Josephine's death. Chaol tells her, listen closely. Chaol tells her that the Nameless King's decree to kill all magic users, you know, the decree that led to countless deaths, including Josephine's, was actually not the idea of the evil Valg spirit possessing him, but was in fact a heroic action that came from the remaining spirit of the human man who was being possessed. And he did it to try and save magic users from the terrible fate of being possessed by the Valg. That's also why he used the obsidian towers to make the spell to banish all magic on the northern continent. This is such a blatant retcon that I'm kind of in awe of it. Up till this point, we were led to believe that the banishing of all magic was done by the Nameless King on Arwen's orders, so that no one would have the power to go up against the Valg. But now it's being framed as a good thing? Even though we spent all of Book 4 dedicated to breaking that spell, and also because people died? Also, Chaol describes word marks as being outside of magic, and I don't know what that means or what they really are. This magic system upsets me if I think about it for too long, so we just have to move on. One day, Irene feels that creepy presence from the library stalking her again, so she and Chaol blockade themselves into his room, and something starts slamming repeatedly into the door while hissing for Irene. Luckily, it doesn't get inside, but it also vanishes before the guards and before the guards and Kashan arrive to help. Kashan notices something going on between Chaol and Irene, and he is not happy. But then Chaol goes to train with the other guards to signify that he's healing emotionally as well as physically, but like we already knew that. Nesryn and Sartok have arrived at his Ruck clan's Eyrie. The Eyries are like a collection of network strongholds literally in the mountains, with a different Ruckan clan sort of like in charge of each one. You can travel between these on Rucks, and technically all the clan leaders answer to the Khaganate, but Sartok's clan is called Eredun. The specific stronghold they visit is called Altun, which translates to Windhaven. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. None of it matters. We are never going to see this place again. The leader and elder of Eredun is Sartok's hearth mother, Hulan. Nesryn meets her, and also Hulan's granddaughter and heir, Bort, who is basically like a sister to Sartok. Surprisingly, there's also this random Otterlinian merchant here named Falcon Inir. He's been on the southern continent for the past 2 years, but he's only come to Windhaven in the past few weeks. Do you remember in the video for the 4th book I talked about how Sarah J Maas repeats phrases a lot? One of those ones that she loves to repeat is fucking sapphire eyes. I counted in Empire of Storms. The blue tabs are all only sapphire eyes. It's 11 in one book. Dorian isn't in this book, so I thought I would be free from the fucking sapphire eyes, but no. Falcon Inir also has sapphire eyes for some reason. Whatever. He doesn't know much about what's gone down in the north in the past 2 years. Nesryn and Sartok start bonding because they both feel torn between two worlds and parts of their identity, and also all of the Ruckin are impressed with Nesryn because she shows off her mad archery skills in the training grounds, and they literally all stop to stare at her. Look, I like Nesryn fine. I mean, she's barely a three-dimensional character, but that's not her fault. I'm not saying she shouldn't be good at archery, but I'm saying that when every single main character in these books is really, really good at their skill of choice, it just makes scenes like this boring to read. Oh, is she gonna be able to shoot the target? Of course she is, and also everyone's gonna clap afterwards. Sartok also admits that he has had spies keeping an eye on Nesryn and also everyone else on the northern continent before this book. Me too. This board is pinned up in Sartok's bedroom closet. Sartok is so into Nesryn, like, it's kind of cringe. Like, calm down. The reports left out some key information. They didn't mention that you're beautiful. No, stop. Hulan and Falcon tell them that the Stygian spiders have been attacking ruck nests and stealing their eggs. These spiders are featured in the novellas. Also, I'm pretty sure Falcon is too. They're basically your classic high fantasy big sentient spiders. Thanks, Jert. And they're also apparently hanging out in the ruins of a stronghold called the Daigle Fells. Thanks, Jert. Stygian spiders can spin super strong, indestructible spider silk that's very expensive. Like, trade away 20 years of your life for a little bit expensive, which is exactly what Falcon did. Falcon is mainly here so he can exposition dump about the spiders to us, but to give him plot reasons, he's also working on a random side quest where he's trying to get his youth back by killing the spider that ate his 20 years. Hulan wants Sartok to retrieve the stolen ruck eggs, and she also thinks the spider's increased aggression is a clue that Erewhon is rising again, summoning his dark forces to battle against the light in his quest to cast the land into shadow. I will admit, I am curious about when Sarah J Maas first watched or read The Hobbit. Anyway, yes, Hulan knows about the Valg, even though they supposedly never made it as far as the southern continent. She tells Nesryn and Sartok that a word gate briefly opened in these mountains long ago, and that's how the Stygian spiders got here in the first place. The Fae came down from the north to instruct the Ruckin on how to fight the Valg, teaching them their language and building watchtowers along the mountain range for protection. Of course they did. She just gotta have them involved in everything. Nesryn can't tell Sartok and Hulan about the Aelin crew's plan to use the word keys and seal the word gates because she doesn't want any Valg to learn of it, but Hulan suggests they go investigate one of the abandoned Fae watchtowers, which is called Eidolon because of course it is. Sometimes I think that all fantasy authors have a list of like 200 words they have to use in their books before they're allowed to get published. At least Lonnie Taylor and Cassandra Clare used Eidolon in a way that had to do with its original meaning. They investigate Eidolon and find some cool Fae swords and also a giant spider who attacks them. But don't worry, they're saved by a giant gray wolf. A giant gray wolf with sapphire eyes. Oh my god, Falcon is a shapeshifter. Apparently it ran in his family, but he didn't realize he had magic until he left the northern continent because of the magic ban. Sartok is weirdly anti-shifter at first, but Nesryn is chill because, quote, one of her friends is a shifter. I don't know if I would count Lysandra and Nesryn as friends considering I don't recall them ever speaking to each other, but Nesryn's like definitely aware of Lysandra's existence. Coincidentally, so is Falcon because he's actually her uncle. They don't know that yet, but I just wanted to tell you early. Dramatic irony, my friends. Falcon was wounded, so they take him back to Windhaven and talk to Hulan more, who has conveniently just remembered more Valg history while they were gone. Sartok puts together that Erewhon has at least one word key and asks Nesryn if she knows where the others are. She can't tell him Aelin's plan, and he gets randomly really mad at her all of a sudden, but then the next time we get a Nesryn chapter, they're immediately back to being friends, and Nesryn sings for his Hearth family, and everyone's like, wow, your voice is so beautiful, and also she and Sartok have sexy prolonged eye contact, so we all know where this is going. Meanwhile, in Antica, Chaol and Irene go back to the library. Take a shot every time they end up in the fucking library in this book.
She's just about to close up the library!
They ask the head librarian, a healer named Nusha, how the books about the Valg ended up in the library in the first place. She doesn't know, but she suggests they go look for information in a cave in the Exara Oasis. Truly a wild recommendation from a librarian. No, sorry, we don't have that book here. Have you tried checking a subterranean cave in the middle of the desert? The Exara Oasis is owned by the royal family, so Irene manipulates Hussar into throwing her a birthday party there. I cannot emphasize enough at this point in the book how horny Chaol and Irene are for each other. I know they just set up their Oasis party plan, but then a bunch of shit has to happen before we get there, I'm sorry. Nesryn and Sartok send word that they're extending their trip by another 3 weeks. Irene still thinks Nesryn and Chaol are together and is guilty about her feelings for him, but then she says he never touched Irene more than was necessary, which is a straight up lie because 7 sentences later, he touches her hand for no reason. And then on the next page, he brushes her knee with his under the table, which, oh yeah, he has mobility up to his knees now. Great. Hussar's spies have brought info about Aelin and Dorian reappearing at the Battle of Skull's Bay because Chaol's fake info turned out to be accurate. Side note, if you're keeping track, this means we're only about halfway through Empire of Storms. The pacing on these parallel novels is really uneven. Argoon tries to spin Aelin to be a power-hungry conqueror to his father, and when Chaol jumps to her defense, Hussar asks him to swear on Irene's life that Aelin isn't a conqueror, and he can't do it. Kashan gives Chaol some, insider trade info to help him convince Eurus to join the war, but Eurus is unimpressed or whatever. I'm bored. Chaol gets upset, and then he and Irene have a fight, but then when Chaol goes too far and she turns to leave, he panics and he takes a step towards her. Oh my god, guys, true love is so strong. Whatever, they kiss, and also Chaol can walk with the help of a cane now. And now they start kicking the Oasis party plot into gear. Also, 9 pages after their first kiss, Chaol suggests getting Irene pregnant as a way for them to get out of attending parties they don't want to go to. Calm down. Back in the mountains, Sartok, Nesryn, Bort, and Falcon investigate some other watchtowers and run into another Ruckin clan that's led by this guy Yeren. He and Bort seem to hate each other, so of course they're actually betrothed. Then Nesryn, Sartok, and Falcon fly to the Dagelfels to search for stolen baby Rucks and eggs. Kadara dives to rescue a hatchling they see, but it's a trap and she runs into a spiderweb. They crash on the floor of Mirkwood or wherever they are, and the baby Ruck gets fucking eaten by a spider in front of them and us. The two plots are about to get goofy in how disparate they are. While Sartok and Nesryn are pulling off a last minute escape from a horde of bloodthirsty giant demon spiders, Chaol and Irene are caravanning out to their desert honeymoon. But don't worry, they're not just here for fun and games. They're on business. The Oasis supposedly sits atop a city of the dead that predates the Khaganate, and they find a mausoleum that is decorated with statues of the Fae and the Valg. Right before this moment of discovery, Irene notes that healers seem almost drawn to the southern continent historically, as if it were some sort of breeding ground for healing. Keep that in mind. Anyway, they realize that this is a Fae burial ground, not a human one. The Southerners don't traditionally bury their dead. But it's weird because Chaol notes that only one group of Fae was ever thought to have left Doranel, the ones who went with Brannon when he founded Terrasen. That's a revelation for Chaol and Irene, but the readers already know that because we learned it 3 chapters ago with Nesryn. This tomb apparently dates to the first Demon War before Elena and Gavin were born. What the fuck does this mean? Were Elena and Gavin part of a second Demon War? Who was fighting in the first Demon War? Have we ever heard about a previous Demon War before right now? So this info, combined with Irene's observations on how the southern continent attracts healers, leads Chaol to put forth this absolutely batshit pieced together theory that's of course going to be right. Basically, the Fae came to the southern continent to pass their healing magic into the human bloodlines, hoping that the Valg would be distracted waging wars in the north and wouldn't notice a continent full of gifted magical healers growing and thriving in the south over the years. The Fae predicted that the large population of healers would survive for generations because a powerful system like an empire would spring up to protect them because of how valuable they are. The only other place in the world with a similar collection of magic healers is Doranel, which is famously ruled by Maeve. Now this is where Chaol's theorizing starts to fall apart, because Maeve fought against the Valg in previous wars. So why would the Fae have to cultivate a new group of healers if they had the old ones still under their command? We'll get to it. Irene jumps on the jumping to conclusions train and decides that the Valg thing hunting her back in Antica was probably trying to keep her from learning all of this about the healers and the Fae and the Valg. The overall implication here is that there is something about the healers' magic that the Valg are afraid of and don't want anyone to know. Just laying that out there clearly. And then they decide that their next step is to go back to Antica and ask Hafiza to help translate some of the library scrolls they've hidden. Why would you do that in this order? First, we have to have some drama go down at dinner. Hussar implies that Kashan should marry Irene to form an alliance, but then Chaol gets that won't happen, and Kashan is embarrassed, and then Irene gets drunk. Hussar says a mean comment about Chaol's wheelchair, which leads to her pushing Hussar into the pool. I don't watch Love Island, but I imagine this is what Love Island is like. Anyway, then Chaol gives Irene a locket and they have sex. Sartok is literally bleeding out in a cave right now. But that's great. We continue to get great descriptions of sex, such as, it broke her and unmade her and rebirthed her. What? The sex rebirthed you. What does that mean? What? Anyway, we finally go back to Sartok and Nesryn, who are literally navigating an inescapable rock maze full of death spiders. So they're running from the spiders, and there's this narrow pass between two rocks that Sartok's ripped muscular chest keeps him from being able to get through, and he tells Nesryn to keep going without him. Then he tells her he loved her even before he saw her, and he wishes they had more time, and then he gets yoinked by a spider. I wish you guys had more time too, mainly so I would be able to care about this random declaration of love. Nesryn comes up with a plan to try and rescue Sartok, which involves her getting bit by a giant spider, falling unconscious, and then waking up later in a cocoon while Falcon, as a mouse, like chews through the silk. This is... whatever. Then a huge, scary female spider approaches and starts questioning Nesryn. Lady Spider didn't get a name, so I chose to refer to her by the completely random collection of letters N-O-T-S-H-E-L-O-B. That's our spider. The spider tells Nesryn that she and her sisters are waiting in the mountains for the return of their dark queen.
Hold up.
Yes, you heard that right. Their dark queen. Nesryn's like, don't you mean Erwin? And not Chaol'S is like, no, we hate Erwin. We're talking about the Valg queen who calls herself Maeve. She asks Brannon if Maeve is Valg. Brannon says no. I'm gonna let that sink in. I'll be right back. Can you even see that? Okay, did you have time? Did you think about it? Did you think about the implications of that? Moving on. Nesryn needs to buy time for Falcon, so she starts flattering the spider and saying stuff like, oh, I only came in here because I had to see if the rumors were true, if the Stygian spiders were as great and powerful as they say. And not Chaol'S / not Smaug is like, what's your name? And Nesryn's like, Windseeker, my mother called me. Also Ringwinner and Barrel Rider. The spider is flattered and decides to give Nesryn a history lesson. This scene is just nothing. Nesryn just asks nicely, Nesryn just asks nicely, and the evil spider sits down for a chapter to literally tell her what she needs to know. Secondly, I don't care that Maeve is Valg. What does that matter? What does it change? We already knew she was evil. Now she's just a different brand of it. And if you ask me, it's a less interesting brand of evil. But because we have to have some kind of major plot twist, we're pivoting who the big bad is again. Now it's Maeve. She's scarier than Erwin. Not Chaol'S tells Nesryn that there were originally 3 Valg brothers: Orcus, Mantix, and Erwin. They conquered the Valg realm and ruled over it as kings. Sometime after that, vague, a dark queen arose, whom all 3 brothers desired. Maeve eventually married the eldest brother, Orcus. I don't think they were actually in love, but I gave them a red line to signify a marriage. But Maeve was so power-hungry and evil by nature that she could not be satisfied with the span of their empire. So this Dark Queen started studying the paths between worlds, and eventually she traveled into a new realm without the king's knowledge, intending to abandon the brothers. How did she learn to travel between the worlds? You're right, that seems like a really interesting element of this story. Let's see what the spider says. She had watched, had learned of such rips between worlds. Does that mean the word gates? The Stygian spiders were her handmaidens, and she told them to stay back and guard the gate where she came through. Over time, the spiders learned that Orcus and his brothers were pursuing her because they had made the word keys and figured out how to control the word gates. How did the spiders learn this? Never explained. The Valg kings laid waste to world after world while searching for Maeve. Meanwhile, Maeve magically brainwashed the entire world into believing she had always existed on this plane. So when the Valg kings finally made it to this world, they didn't recognize Maeve because of her Fae form. That's when she went on her little word key retrieval mission with Athril and Brannon, and they sent Orcus and Mantix back to the Valg world. But Brannon took the keys from Maeve before she could send Erwin back too. And I guess then Elena stole the lock before he could use it to banish Erwin. All of these magical items are explained like just vaguely enough that I'm aware of them in the story, but I can't ever quite figure out what they do. Why didn't Brannon just banish Erwin using the word keys once he had them? Didn't he have the word keys and the Eye of Elena at one point? Was it because he made like a deal with the gods and the lock? But why did he even need to make that deal if he had the word keys that he stole from Maeve? why couldn't he banish Erwin if he had banished Orcus and Mantix that way with the word keys? Plus, how did Brandon know how to wield the word keys? Did Maeve tell him? Because she and the Valg seem to be the only ones who knew how to use them. Maeve and Brandon both separately retreated and prepared for Erwin to grow stronger again one day. I guess Erwin being in a sarcophagus meant they couldn't banish him with the word keys while he was locked up. But neither Brandon nor Erwin know of Maeve's true identity. Not Shelob infodumps all of that super relevant lore, and Nesryn has stalled long enough for Bort and Yaren to come in as backup and rescue her and Sartok and Falcon. And also Kadara. Don't worry, I didn't forget Kadara, the only bitch in this house I respect. It's around this time that Falcon reveals he's searching for his long-lost niece because he wants to give her all his fortune, and Nesryn's like, think I know who that is. But that doesn't matter. Chaol and Irene make it back to Antica from their desert party and find that Chaol's rooms have been trashed and most of those books they were looking for have been stolen. What a surprise! Irene brings their one remaining scroll to Hafiza, and Hafiza's like, I can't read this. But it reminds her of this locked cabinet that all the healers on high have access to, which contains books written in word marks that no one can read. Cool. In the midst of all this, we have one final magic healing session with Chaol. This chapter is just a dream vision montage of Chaol's greatest and not so greatest hits, and it leads to him coming to two main conclusions. Number one is that he can forgive Aelin for breaking his heart, because she promised to be with him when she was still Selena, but then she broke things off with him and went away and met Rowan. He says he can understand that now because he did the same thing with Nesryn and Irene. I don't think the circumstances of those two situations were the same at all. Number two, he realizes that Dorian forgives him and loves him, and Chaol promises he'll return to Dorian's side soon. Please, can we return to Dorian's side soon? This does mean we see Dorian in a dream vision, and of course he's described as having sapphire eyes. Then in his final vision, Irene appears to him and says the darkness within him is now his to shape and choose how it defines him. Guys, wow, the Valg energy was a metaphor all along. Do you see how it's really about Chaol's emotional journey, and the Valg shadow in his spine is really just a manifestation of his character? Chaol is back to full mobility. He and Irene say they love each other. Nesryn and Sartok report to the Council of Ruckin leaders about the spiders and the Valg, but then Nesryn gets an urgent message from Chaol asking her to return, so she and Sartok head back to Antica. I don't really know what was so urgent about this message, because when we cut back to Chaol and Irene, they're just chilling. Irene thinks the Valg function as parasites, feeding on their hosts. I think we've known that since book 3. Aelin and Dorian used fire magic to burn the Valg out of the old king, but the fire wounded him fatally in the process. Irene's theory is that her healing magic will be able to remove the Valg demons from their hosts without killing the host. Presumably, this knowledge and skill would be why Erwin's Valg agent in Antica is hunting her. It is unclear at the end of this book if anyone but her could heal the hosts, or if it's just a her thing. Chaol's theory of the hour is that Athril, remember Athril? Chaol thinks he was the original Fey healer, since it was his golden ring that makes you immune to Valg possession, and his Fey form is an owl, which is the symbol of Silba. I don't understand the relationship between the Fae and the gods in this world. Like, which came first? Chaol bases this entire theory on the fact, brace yourself, that there was an owl in the tapestry in Selena's room at the Glass Castle in book 1. We're talking about book 1. How the hell does an owl in a tapestry mean Athril is the Valg exorcist? I don't understand that connection at all. I didn't draw a fucking line from Silba to Athril because I'm not doing that. Hussar shows up to report that we've caught up to the Empire of Storms timeline and the beach battle between Aelin and Maeve has taken place. She also reveals that Aelin wrote her a letter asking for help weeks ago, and Hussar is fully on board the Aelin train now because she's so badass and cool. Remember, they don't know that Aelin's been captured at the end of that battle because Lysandra shapeshifted into her. Irene and Chaol go to meet with Hafiza again, but she's missing. They go down to their favorite place, the library, and go to these secret tunnels under the library to search. These lead them to the same Fey necropolis they found at the Oasis. Apparently, this is a big underground cemetery. So they find themselves in this giant cavern filled with gold and Fey sarcophagi, and also Hafiza, who's being held at knife point. By whom, you ask? by Princess Duva. She's Valg infested as hell. So Duva has been the Valg presence stalking Irene and Antika all along. There's this bit where Valg Duva is like, don't you want to know how I did it? And Chaol replies, I'm sure you'll tell us anyway. And I don't think it's actually cleverer to have a little tongue-in-cheek acknowledgement that you're about to do a villain monologue right before your villain launches into their villain monologue, especially after so much of this book has just been monologues. Duva's wedding ring is actually a Valg obsidian ring covered in silver that was a gift from Duke Parrington. She killed Tumaloon because her sister had noticed something was off and Duva made it look like a suicide. She's the one who destroyed Chaol's rooms and stole the books while everyone else was at the Oasis. In the middle of all of this, Valg Duva talks about how Erwin made sure to purge the gifted ones, meaning magic healers, from the northern lands. So I guess we're retconning that previous retcon and the magic ban / purge was his idea now? The Valg want to take Irene to Morath, so now they have to have a fight. At one point, Duva tries to blast Irene with dark magic, but Chaol pushes her out of the way and takes the full blast of Valg magic in his spine again. Oh no. How will he ever heal from this one? Irene is having a crisis about whether or not to attack Duva, but then Nesryn and Sartak randomly show up in these tunnels out of nowhere and are like, we're just in time. Yeah, I guess. And they and Hafiza help Irene knock Duva out. Irene goes to try and heal Chaol, but oh no, it's too late. He's dying for real. Irene doesn't care. She sees a vision of Silba / Josephine who tells her that there will be a cost to heal him. Irene does not care. She heals Chaol of everything, including all of his old scars. Wow, guys. It's like a metaphor, you know, it's like love heals all wounds. The cost is that Irene and Chaol's lives are now forever entwined. Meaning if one of them dies, so does the other. They're going to a war. I don't care how much I love someone. I would rather you just let me die. That's some like Lucinda level gift that I don't want. They bring Valg Duva to her husband and parents and siblings, and Irene heals her and casts out the Valg, and Duva's fine and everyone's grateful, and the Kagan is now ready to join the war effort. Actually, everyone is all about the war effort now. Hussar is going north with them, apparently for Duva and Tumaloon, the two sisters she has never spoken to on page before, and Sartak offers a force of 1,000 Ruckin. One of those Ruckin will be Nesryn. She is bonded with a Ruck named Salki. Also, Nesryn's father and sister and her children have arrived in Antika to stay with her aunt and uncle and wait out the war. Nesryn has this very like Mulan moment where Sartak comes and visits her at her family's house, and he tells her he's officially been appointed his father's heir, and then they kiss and declare their love for each other. Cool, whatever. Irene also has a scene with Kashan where she notes it seems like he and his siblings have moved past the need to kill / sterilize / exile each other, but it's never explained why she thinks that. Like, sure, they're all glad Duva's safe, but we never see the royals act like they care about each other at all before the last 50 pages of the book. And even then, we don't really see it. It's just kind of like told to us that they are better now. I don't buy it. Anyway, the end of this book. Half of the gathered southern forces begin sailing back to the northern continent. Irene and Chaol are on one of the boats, and also, they're married now. I get that it's the power of true love and all, but they've known each other for like 3 months max? If I had Chaol's record, I would maybe just wait a little longer on that one. But also I have been in Chaol's head, and I know he's so pumped to get her pregnant and start his white picket fence family that he can provide for her. And also their life forces are bound together, so like, yeah, who else are you gonna marry? Anyway, Irene shows him the note from the stranger in the tavern that started her on her journey to Antika, and Chaol of course recognizes the handwriting as Aylin's. Glad we wrapped that thread up. Then we get a very quick epilogue check-in with Aylin. I lied, you are gonna see her very briefly. She's arrived in her iron coffin wherever Maeve has taken her, and her torture is about to begin, so there's that to look forward to. And that is the end. We made it. We made it, guys. We made it through Tower of Dawn, a book that is basically 680 pages of lore dumped on top of a boring rom-com frame. Like I said at the beginning, most of the info in this book is irrelevant going forward, but our main takeaways are: 1, Nesryn is dating the heir to the southern continent now. 2, Chaol is married to Irene and also his life force is bound to hers. And 3, Maeve is actually Valg, not Fae, and Erwin hates her too. And also, like, the southern continent is sending aid to the war effort, but like, did we ever think they weren't going to? This means we only have one book left, guys. Now granted, it is the longest book of the series. It might be the longest book I've ever read. Is that true? Holy shit. A Storm of Swords is 973 pages. Kingdom of Ash is 992. And also it came out on my birthday. What the fuck? This is personal, Sarah. You did this to me on purpose. I read Kingdom of Ash around the time it came out, but only once, so it will be interesting to see what I think of it on the reread. Maybe I'll love it. Place your bets now. As always, thank you guys for watching. I broke 200 subscribers sometime after posting the 4th video. That's like huge for me, and I'm really glad y'all are enjoying these videos. It's just really nice to know that other people out there are getting something out of this, so thank you, for real. I'm Carson, this is Pursued by a Bear, and I will see you all when I come back to talk about Kingdom of Ash. Catch you guys later. Do y'all see what I mean about it being boring though? Like, do y'all get it? It's so boring.